You're going to be challenged by our next guest, Paul Myrant. He's the author of The Challenge of Evolution, and it's a book he wrote in one of the darkest hours of his life. He was a pastor for 14 years in California, but tonight he's our guest on Atlanta Live. Let's welcome him to the set tonight.
Thank you, Jim.
Good to have you tonight.
Hi, Pastor.
Great to see you
Amen.
guys.
All third.
Awesome, awesome.
Amen.
Well, you know, it's an amazing subject, and I just want to kind of break down and get right into it. But first, when did you give your heart to Christ? Was you raised in a Christian home, or?
I was raised in a Christian home. My father is a seminary professor and a pastor, church planting seminary professor, and he planted churches our whole life. And I continued that process as an adult, and as a young person, I've been involved in about 17 church plants. Wow! And over the years, some of them with my youth group, we did several when I was a young man. And so I became a Christian actually at age 5. When family devotions, I remember it very clearly. I know a lot of people don't think you can get saved then, but I did. And my wife got saved at age 6, you know, and I got saved at age 5. So, and I just knew I needed Jesus. I knew it was real. I knew it was a sinner, and somehow I just comprehended it. And so, and I began doing evangelism when I was 8. I can remember being on the schoolyard, talking to my friends and wanting to tell them. And that's really been the passion of my heart since I can really remember, is evangelism. And I talked to individuals, thousands of them, really, you know, mostly at the gym. You know, our last guest was involved in that, and you know, in the sauna, I talked to lots and lots of people, and a lot of the book came out of that, and a lot of it's how I do evangelism. And
well, I was going to ask you, what made you want to pick up one of the most controversial subjects in all of humanity, not just, you know, obviously Christianity, but you know, what caused you to want to take on this challenge?
It's something that I had passion about for many years. I've spent about 37 years actually studying, doing research. I've read thousands of articles, many books, and as I said, thousands of conversations, literally, with people. And it's a number of things. Part of it is my own personal questions. You know, how do you resolve, you know, the age of the earth, billions versus, you know, the Bible? And I'm a very strict biblicist. I believe the Bible means what it says, and I think it's very clear. But there's a lot of conflicts with that. So, and I've always felt that you go to the museum and you hear millions and you love the museum, but then all of this stuff and then
there's the creation theory, which is 6,000 plus years.
Right. Basically, and then millions of evolution. And how do you resolve that conflict? So, what I've tried to do in this book, and I mean, let me just say that first. Part of what I'm trying to do in the book is 3 things. Number 1 is I want to be certain of what we can know for sure. And I approach this from a non-biblical perspective. And I mean that it's not anti-biblical, but I didn't start with the Bible. I start with logic. What does the universe itself tell us? And that really comes from Paul, because he said in Romans 1, he said, the invisible attributes of God, his eternal power and divine nature are clearly seen, so that men are without excuse. So what was he saying? He was saying, number 1, we know that not just that there's a creator, but you can know what he's like. So I said, if that's true, how do I tell somebody who doesn't know Jesus or who's questioning and have confusion about this subject, how do I tell them that they can know for certain there's a creator? So the first section answers, is there a creator? And there's about 8 different arguments. And the second section says, what is the creator like? Of course, every argument that says God exists actually tells you one of his characteristics. So they're kind of like opposite sides of the same coin. And so what you find is these 9 characteristics of the creator that you can find without ever opening the Bible. That he's good, that he's eternal, he's all-powerful, he's a judge, he's a communicator. All of these things that God is are exactly what the God of the Bible says, or how the Bible describes God. But we have rejected the Bible in Western civilization since the advent of Darwinism. That really is what began that process in Europe. And so why does that? And so it really is Darwinism that has undermined the Bible and the biblical record in Western civilization. And all of Europe. Europe is much worse than we are in the process, because they have less people that believe in God. Like 7% would hold to any kind of a biblical record or even believe in God at all. And so the process is huge, and this has been going on. So I go into the history of evolution, and then I really do try to resolve the conflicts between the age of the earth. And basically that comes down to, what has science proved? What does it know for a fact? What is based on its assumptions? So I look at the philosophy behind this and the details, and there's a tremendous number of Christian scientists and people and a tremendous amount of research that actually, I think, supports a biblical record from a scientific point of view. Although I don't think you can prove either one.
Sure.
there's a certain point you have to come to faith in something. But, I think there's a basis to really hold to the Bible. So that's really kind of how I, got into it and what it was.
What do you think? We talk about the basic structure of this dimension of atoms. And you hit on that but before these three dimensions, God stood and spoke, framed universe and all that.
Mm-hmm.
What was God doing? What was he planning? Was it all a plan? I mean, what was he doing before he decided to stand on nothing, speak, frame the worlds, and creation come into existence? I mean, what was his agenda? What did he do?
It's a great question, and we don't really know for sure, but I actually wrote another little story that talks about the history of it. And in the past, it's called The Christmas Story. And the idea of it is that, these three stood alone in light and glory, perfect peace and splendor. They had nothing. They didn't need anything. They were perfect, but they planned and they thought about us, and they wanted to have someone that would know them and someone that would actually worship them. And really, this is the whole point of our lives, is really to worship
That's
God.
right.
And we think about that in kind of religious terms, and I don't want people to get the idea. It's not just that we go to church and we fold our hands. That's a part of worship. I think there's a certain amount of worship when, I remember Michael Jordan used to, when he made the last shot against Utah, many years ago, and the things that people do sometimes athletically, the power, the things that they do, the grace that they exercise, all of that glorifies God. All of that is worship in a sense. Everything that we do, that we really empty ourselves and let it out, even if a person doesn't necessarily understand they're doing it for God, it's a form of worship. And really, the idea of all of this was so that we would really know God and worship Him and just be in relationship with Him. And it's to be a natural relationship. It is a father-child relationship, and so I think that in eternity past, it's one of the things that people talk about. They think, well, God, how could He do this? Well, for one thing, He's had eternity to think about it.
Yeah.
If He wanted, it's like, and maybe, and say, sometimes sometimes you want to think, well, God didn't need to think about it. Well, I don't know if He did or not. He could have just known it all instantly. But if He needed to think about it, He's had eternity to plan it. So if He wanted to make things, He could have done it in a very quick process. Mm-hmm. And the issue is that what is the Creator really like? And that's really why I think the book is important in that sense, because again, it's not about evolution, it's really about Christianity. And it's written from a very simple perspective. It's written, my 15-year-old nephew read it in 3 days. It's written so that a young person can read it, an adult can read it and understand it, the average person. But the idea of it is that when we actually see God does exist, and if He does exist, then He has to be like this. And Richard Dawkins actually said this. He said, he talked about the fact that he doesn't believe, which is it's the most ironic thing a man could say. He doesn't believe that the universe is accidental or random. He believes it's tiny, tiny steps over billions of years, but they're not random. But all unguided, all without a purpose, but it's still not random. But he said, if this God existed to make the DNA and the RNA system, he said, and how much more powerful He'd be if He could answer prayers. He understands that if God exists, He must be incredible. And that's why it's so important that we get that issue settled first. We're trying to figure out where life came from and all of these things without the Creator, without first settling that issue. And if that issue is settled in the positive, that there absolutely must be a Creator, then that then begins to guide us in everything that we do from there.
Yeah. Well, if there is a Creator, then we see by creation that He is a planner. We see by creation that He's not done planning. He has a plan. Mm-hmm. And we as human beings, we have to look to the book, the
right.
plan, the instruction manual,
right.
to figure out why some prayers may get answered, why some prayers may not get answered. Right. Sometimes God says no. Yeah, sometimes God says not now. And regardless of the results of where we're at of an unanswered prayer, and sometimes God doesn't answer demands that
we pray amiss.
We pray
ask
amiss
for the wrong reason.
And ask for so there's plenty of things there. But there'll be a time when I think, if as believers we'll be able to look back and say, I don't understand it. I didn't understand it then, but I understand it now. And people say, well, how do you know that where did God come from? And I'm like, well, you didn't even pass trigonometry. Well, do you think God, you have the capacity to understand where God came from if he chose to even try to tell you? You don't have the intellectual ability to, we're trying to figure out the fourth, Sega's trying to figure out the fourth dimension, prove that there is one,
Right. Well, I think, but there's a real logic to all of this, and this is what people really fail to understand about it. It's like, look at something. I make this argument in the book. Something always existed, because everybody asks. This is the atheist big thing. Well, where did God come from? Why can't we imagine that the universe has always been eternal rather than God? Well, because there's no meaning, there's no morality, and it's impossible. It's impossible for inanimate objects to make everything. I mean, please tell me that you don't really believe that.
Yeah.
That nothing or dirt, pre-atomic material, shaped itself into everything in the universe and then made every living thing and all of this that we see. I mean, you really believe that? I mean, does that really make sense to anybody other than if you're just desperate to prove that there's not a God? Nobody really can actually say that. And the point of it is this is the point in the book. It's like, we know something had to exist, either matter, the creator, or both. But if matter is eternal, then did it shape itself? No. So if something has to be eternal, which is more logical? A being of some sort that shaped it and caused everything to come into existence, or matter itself? And it's an obvious choice. And I remember years ago, it was 19...
Could they have both? I mean...
Could they both exist? Of course they could, technically, yes. You could